We need to talk about the book that I read in 2024. The time has finally come. I feel like everyone says this, but these are some of my favorite videos to watch every year, which are people's kind of like wrap-ups of the best and worst books they read of the previous year. So obviously this will be about all the books that I read in 2024. My dog is trying to drink my coffee. But yeah, welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new here, then hello. Make sure that you are subscribed. If you're returning, then hi again. Good to see you again. Before we get into it, and I'll try to make this quick, I have actually started a podcast and the first episode is out. It came out on January 1st. So I'm gonna have that first episode linked down below. It's on YouTube and then it's also on Spotify. So I'll have it both linked. And in that first episode, we go in depth, me and my co-host Emily, about our favorite and least favorite books of 2024. So if you want to hear even more about these books, then I'm pretty sure I touched on most of them in that episode. And then also we have Emily's favorites and least favorites. And yeah, the podcast comes out every Wednesday. It's gonna be like a bookish-esque podcast. Would love to have you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna start with best books. I'm gonna save my hater energy for the end, just so that I can kind of leave you guys with that. And the way that I organize these is like in the order that I read them last year. So they're not organized from like my least favorite to most favorite or anything. It's just like the first one will be the first favorite I read in the year, and then all the way up to like December of 2024, if that makes sense. And then I'll do the same for the worst books. Okay, so starting with one of my favorites, The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I have been getting more into romance books lately because I work at a romance bookstore now. But earlier in 2024, I was not the biggest romance reader. I read like a few every year, but it wasn't my main genre or anything. So for this to be on a favorites list is like, you know, it was really good. So The 7-Year Slip is like a magical realism, kind of contemporary fiction romance is how I would describe it. I feel like everyone has read it at this point, but if you haven't, a quick little synopsis is that it is set in New York. The female main character inherits an apartment from her aunt, except this apartment is kind of like a magical apartment because sometimes when she comes home it's like present day, and then sometimes when she comes home it's 7 years in the past, and then she ends up having a romance with the guy who was living there 7 years in the past, who's a chef, by the way. I feel like I always have to say that. It's just vital information. I obviously loved this book so much. I just thought it was very well written. I loved the relationship. Like I remember thinking that the relationship was just very sweet, which is something that I really like in my romance books. I feel like those are normally like my favorites. And I think in all of Ashley Poston's books, yeah, definitely. I've read all 3 of her books and all 3 of them kind of touch on grief. And the way that that was done in this book, I just thought was really beautiful and special and definitely made me tear up at points. Obviously a 5-star read. Pretty much every book on my best books are a 5-star read. If not a 5-star, they're like a 4.5 and above, but for all intents and purposes, all 5 stars. Okay, then next, and I'm counting this as one book because we're doing 10 best books and then 5 worst books. I don't know if I said that. So in order to make this fit, I'm counting this as one book, but it basically was one book, and I'm talking about the tandem read in Throne of Glass, which is Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. I read them at the same time, so obviously in my head, they're kind of the same book. If you guys don't know the tea on the tandem read, it's just that they are set in the same timeline with like the same events happening, but following different groups of characters. So that's why you read them at the same time. This controversially was my favorite part of the Throne of Glass series. I have to say I was like a little bit disappointed in Kingdom of Ash just because my expectations were like skyrocketed through the roof, and I don't think that it quite lived up to what I had in my head. I know people are probably gonna be upset at me for saying that, but I actually didn't end up giving Kingdom of Ash a 5-star. I think I gave it like a 4.5, but the tandem read were both 5 stars for me. I thought the amount of character development we saw with all the characters in these 2 books was really just like impressive to me. And also I loved Tower of Dawn so much. I love a slow burn romance, and I felt like Tower of Dawn was just like a masterclass in how to do that. It was so slow burn, and then also redeemed one of the characters that you kind of grow to not like as much throughout the series. And I love a good redemption arc. I love a good slow burn. So it was just like everything that I wanted, and I felt like it was kind of a needed, like, I don't know, hiatus or like rest from the rest of the series, because the rest of the series is like so intense and so crazy. And it's not like stuff isn't happening in Tower of Dawn, but it's just like a different pace, I feel like is what I'm trying to say. And that was appreciated and needed, I felt like. And then Empire of Storms, I just thought was really fun. Like a lot of the action scenes were really fun. I'm not normally like an action scene person because it's kind of hard for me to picture like what's going on during like a fight scene or an action scene. But I remember like there was one particular action action scene in this book that I was reading on a plane, and like I was locked in. Like that plane literally could have been crashing and falling out of the sky, and I would have been like, okay, hang on, like let me finish this chapter, you know? And yeah, I just remember thinking that Empire of Storms was a lot of fun. Kingdom of Ash, on the other hand, I was just depressed and like not in a fun way. I did cry a lot. Like it was a great book, but I just preferred The Tangerine. Okay, then we have Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, another romance book. This was the first Abby Jimenez book that I read, and I read it because it is like the first book in her kind of interconnected series where she has Yours Truly and then Just for the Summer. So I read Part of Your World because I'd heard that it's kind of like you need to read that before you read the other ones, and I kind of was like, I don't like really want to read this, you know, but I guess I will. And then it like blew me out of the water. This one is a small town romance with an age gap, but the girl is older and the guy is younger, which I've never read a book like with that specific trope, and I just thought that it really worked. I loved the male love interest in this book. Again, very sweet relationship. He's like, if I remember correctly, his job is that he works at and like runs his grandparents' bed and breakfast or something, or like he runs a bed and breakfast out of his grandparents' house that they used to live in, and it's just really sweet. Very small town, has like the sweet small town vibes where you have like all the different like characters in the small town that reappear from time to time. Just very sweet. I'm pretty sure that I cried in this one too. Then we have Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I feel like I had talked about this book ad nauseum on TikTok in particular, but I love anything like a movie, a book. A lot of my favorite movies actually are movies that just like screw with your brain. Like I love a psychological thriller, and this book kind of felt like a psychological thriller, but in a totally different way than like Gone Girl or Sharp Objects or like Midsummer or like any of those kind of like movies or books. It was almost like a sci-fi fantasy psychological thriller, and I feel like that's all I really want to say about it because I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing. I didn't even read the back of it, and it absolutely blew my mind once I realized what was going on. You're basically reading the journals of the main character. So all you have to go on is really what the main character knows and understands about their situation. And you are gonna be confused at first. And then as it starts to like unravel and you realize what's actually happening, it's just like so mind-blowing. And I love that feeling of like uncovering a plot twist and being like mind blown. How did I not see it before? Like this book really gave me that. Just a really fun reading experience. Then The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This is one that was recommended to me by my mom actually. I had not really seen it online anywhere, but this was such a fun book. This is just like regular general fiction, I guess, but it has like very gothic vibes. It's definitely heavily inspired by Jane Eyre, and they talk about Jane Eyre in the book. But the premise of this book is that our main character is kind of like a very reclusive, bookish person, and her like specialty or like area that she's really into is autobiographies or biographies, and she's kind of just like a no one. Like she's not famous or well known or an author or anything like that, and she gets reached out to one day by a very famous author, kind of like maybe Agatha Christie level vibes of fame in this fictional world. This famous author that reaches out to her has gotten old, and she previously throughout like her life and all of her fame has declined to ever do like a real interview or like expose about her life, but she reaches out to our main character and gives her the opportunity to come and interview her and write the story of her life. It's kind of like similar to Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo in that way, and our main character doesn't know why she's been chosen. We're just kind of like discovering things alongside her, and all I have to say about this book is that it was tea. Like the drama was so good. I love when you get like a really dramatic book that's like family drama, town drama, that's just like so entertaining. It was just tea, and I loved the vibes of it. Like I love anything gothic, Jane Eyre inspired. The atmosphere was great. Okay, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Oh my god, I love this book so much. This was a book that I read the physical copy of, and I had to break out a pen to like underline stuff. I don't really annotate much anymore, although I do want to kind of get back into that in 2025 because I was having a lot of fun like in 2022 and 2023, like underlining and highlighting and tabbing stuff, but that's for a different time. I kind of stopped doing that and then started again because of this book. This book is set in the 16th century, and it is set during Shakespeare's rise to fame, except it is told through the perspective of his wife and children, and it's like heavily insinuated, or not even really insinuated. His wife in this book is a witch, which is iconic, obviously, and Shakespeare himself is really like a fairly minor character in this book. I mean, a lot of the things that are taking place in this story are because of him, like they wouldn't be happening without him, you know what I mean? But he's not really in the book that much because like he's off in London, like being a famous playwright, and then his family is back in Stratford. It was so beautiful. Obviously, this is taking place during the Black Plague era, so like not really good vibes in that way. And it touches a lot on motherhood and family and grief, and was just really a beautiful book. Like this is one that I pick up sometimes and just like read the things that I underline, and it still like hits me in the gut, you know? Definitely will be rereading this at some point. Okay, now we're moving into like fall reads. These are all of my like more recent reads. I feel like I went a few months without really a favorite, so we're going from like May jumping to maybe September now, and that is when I read The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. This book has been on my TBR for years, and I knew that, well, I didn't know for sure that I was gonna like it, but I knew that it was gonna be a really good book, you know what I mean? I don't even know how to describe this, and first I should say I feel like that I've only read the first book. This is a trilogy, and I need to get back to reading the second and third books, but like my brain just hurt so much after I finished the first one that I ended up like picking something else up, and I just haven't gotten back to it. But The 5th Season is like a science fiction fantasy book that takes place during the end of the world, and you're following 3 different characters' perspectives, and they all have like very different roles in society as this is happening. It's 3 different women, I think. Is it? Yes, 3 different women's perspectives. There are some select people in this world that have essentially like earth magic, where they can move around and shift and like manipulate the earth at their will. And these people are very like heavily controlled, surveilled, and oppressed by the government in this world. And I feel like that's all I really can say without getting too confusing. It is really good. It's one of those stories that you start and you're not starting at all with all of the pieces, and then the more you read, the puzzle kind of starts to put itself together and you can see the bigger picture. And I'm sure that that is what's gonna happen as the series goes on, and I am really excited to find out what happens. Just need to continue. But now I'm at the point where like, okay, I'm gonna have to refresh on the first book, but it hasn't been that long. Okay, then in October I read Nocticadia by Carrie Lake. This is like a gothic, dark fantasy romance, I feel like is the best way to describe it. Our main character in this book ends up, even though she is not very well off, she ends up with a full ride to this very like elite school. So it's like, it's also kind of dark academia, which y'all know I love. Anyway, she ends up with like a full ride to the school when she writes this paper, I think for a creative writing class, and it's essentially about what she thinks happened to her mom, who has passed away years prior, and this paper ends up getting discovered. She's admitted to the school based on the merits of that paper. How many times can I say that? So she basically ends up going to this remote college kind of in an effort to figure out what really happened to her mom, because the circumstances surrounding her death are very mysterious. And this school is known for investigating this parasite that is only present and like on this specific island where the school is. She's investigating that whole situation, and then at the same time she's in a romance with her professor, which is not something that I knew if I was gonna like. I guess this is technically like an age gap romance, but I don't remember the age gap being anything like crazy. Like I don't remember being like, oh, this is an age gap romance, you know what I mean? But it is a romance between her and her professor, and it was so good. This was a very long book, but like it could have been longer, honestly, and I would have been happy, because there's like the romance and the mystery and the dark academia school of it all. It just had a lot of really good elements, and I'm really excited to read more Carrie Lake soon. Okay, this next one is arguably maybe my favorite book of the year. I feel like, am I gonna say that? I feel like I'm gonna say it's my favorite book of the year, honestly. And that is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. Oh my god. This might be like my favorite romance book of all time. I know that's a dramatic statement, but like that's genuinely, I felt that strongly about it. In this book, our 2 main characters meet at a Halloween party and they have a one-night stand, which results in an accidental pregnancy. This was the first accidental pregnancy trope book that I read, and now I'm like actively seeking out every accidental pregnancy trope book that I can find. So actually, if you have any recommendations for that trope, let me know. The relationship in this book is another one, just so sweet. These characters are truly literally soulmates. Like they are perfect for each other, and seeing their relationship grow and develop, and then like reading the epilogues where you see them, you know, however many years in the future, was just like so special. I giggled, I cried, all of it. Just like a very emotional read. I don't know, something about it. This was just like one of those books that I really connected with, and I knew it was gonna be 5 stars, like probably 30% into reading it. It's really like a 6-star book for me, if that wasn't apparent. And I'm currently reading the arc of the second book that's like an interconnected standalone, which is Out of the Woods, and it's about like the couple that's like they're friends with in the first book, and it is also so good. Hannah Bottom Young is just like, she's so talented. I'll read anything she writes, like I love her. Okay. And then lastly, for my favorites, we have The Traitor Queen by Danielle L. Jensen. This is the second book in the Bridge Kingdom series. I believe that the Bridge Kingdom series, which there's 5 books out right now and then another one coming out in 2025, is kind of like a series of duologies. So the first 2 books follow 2 characters, and then the second 2 books follow 2 different characters, and then the last 2 books, 2 different characters. Well, unless there's gonna be more. I don't know how many books there's gonna be, but I feel like I'm pretty sure the Bridge Kingdom and the Traitor Queen can just be read like as a duology together, and then you don't need to read any of the rest of the books. Like that's a complete story, you know, if you didn't want to read the rest of the books. I thought that the Bridge Kingdom was fantasy because it is always shelved under fantasy, and I ended up actually, while reading these books, having to look up the definition of like, okay, what is a fantasy book? Because there's no magic, there's no creatures, there's no anything. It's just a made up world. So it feels like a fantasy world, but there's no actual like magic or fantastical elements or creatures, which is not something that I have encountered before. And at first, when I realized that there wasn't going to be any magic or anything, I was kind of a little bit disappointed because I thought, you know, I was reading a fantasy book, but it ended up honestly really not mattering. The relationship between the 2 main characters is what made these books like so good. It's a fantasy romance. I would say it's pretty true enemies to lovers, slow burn, tension, and yearning though. Like that's the key in these books. Tension and yearning. Oh, the yearning. The yearning of it all. I feel like everyone lately has been saying, we want books with yearning, bring yearning back. Guys, these books are right here. There were also like a few lines in The Traitor Queen that I don't know what it was. I just lost it when I read them, like sobbing, crying. It was just so emotional. I was so invested. I really cared about the characters, which is something that I feel like has been lacking in some of the fantasy romance books that I read this year. As we'll see when we get to my worst books. But yeah, I was just super into them. I'm excited to read the rest of the series and see kind of what I think. Definitely going to miss the couple in the first book, so hopefully I'm assuming they'll make an appearance. Okay, now it's worst books time. Thankfully, I don't have as many worst books as I do best books. We're gonna do 5 worst books. These are pretty much the only 5 books that I read this year where I was like, wow, that was really not good. I didn't enjoy that. And by worst, like, I mean worst. I mean, I think that most of these books are not really well written or that entertaining or fun and don't have very many redeemable qualities about them. And yeah, this is my channel, so I can say that. Okay, we're starting off with a heavy hitter because again, we are going in order of reading, and this was just the first worst book of the year, and that was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. Now, caveat with this book is that I read it on Kindle before it was traditionally published, so I'm wondering if maybe some of the things that I didn't like about it were cleaned up and fixed when it was traditionally published, because I feel like that is something that a publisher or an editor would have done. So if anyone like happens to know if they've read both versions or just knows anything about this, let me know, because I see people raving about this book constantly, especially since it has been traditionally published, and I'm wondering if maybe the reasons that I didn't like it have been fixed. So if anyone has any information about that, let me know, because maybe I would give it a second try over audiobook. But nevertheless, let's get into what I did not like about it. First of all, this book was so long in an unnecessary way. I just remember feeling like after I finished it, wow, like that was a whole lot of nothing. There was just a lot of filler, not much happened, unfortunately. And I actually really liked the world in this series. Like for the first 30% of this book, I thought, oh, this is gonna be like a new favorite. It's gonna be a new favorite series. I can't wait to read the second book when it comes out. I was enjoying the romance because this is a fantasy romance. And then it just like, I don't know what happened. It's like it wasn't the same book after 30%. And it was one of those books where I finished it and I was like, wow, I have no idea what just happened. Like I immediately forgot everything as soon as I finished because it wasn't like concrete enough, like the plot points, if that makes any sense. And then the other thing that I remember being really upset about, which is this is one of the things that I feel like maybe they might have fixed, is that for majority of the book, up until like maybe 60 or 70%, you had two perspectives, right? So you had the, if I remember correctly, the female main character and then the male main character, and then you get to 60 to 70% and they start throwing new perspectives in, and it's like, who are these people? And the chapters from the new characters' perspectives were not distinct enough from the two that we already had. So I would have to go, I'd be like halfway through a chapter and then I have to go look and see, wait, who's talking right now? Because I'm confused. That's what I want to say about this book, is that it was, in a word, confusing, and I feel like just unnecessarily so. Like, it just was not that deep, did not need to be that confusing. You know what I mean? Okay, moving on to maybe the worst book that I have ever read. There might be one book that would take the cake over this one, but that's for another day because I didn't read that book in 2024. But Small Town Big Magic by Hazel Beck. I wanted to like this book. I read it as like a cute little palette cleanser. I wanted like a witchy book. I think I was like craving the fall aesthetic earlier this year in like March or April. Picked this book up. Big mistake. The female main character in this book, who is like the main character of the book, who you were supposed to, I imagine, be rooting for, because this is like cute little small town romance vibes, was just the most insufferable character I have ever read about in my entire life. My review on Goodreads says the girl boss from hell, and that is, to this day, how I would describe her. She just was awful. She was not nice to her group of friends. She was not nice to her love interest. I felt bad for the guy that she ended up with. Like, I was like, you need to run in the other direction. And I think I said this in the podcast, but you know, when I feel bad for a man, it's bad. There was nothing redeemable that I liked about her. And when it's a romance and you really don't like the main character or the main characters, it's just like, you know, what's the point? So that was how I felt about this book. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. Like, I remember reading the reviews after and being like, okay, yeah, like, I'm not crazy. Other people are saying this too. Okay, another heavy hitter, we have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. This is a YA fantasy romance. I was severely disappointed by this. First of all, if we're being honest, this is not really a fantasy book. The fantasy world is incredibly underdeveloped. Like, nothing about it is special or new. In fact, I'm sure lots of you guys have seen like the comparisons with Red Queen. I will say I have read both. They are very similar. I don't really know. I don't know. I don't want to comment further than that. But like, my point is it was nothing new and nothing special and pretty underdeveloped. So then we move on to, okay, if it's a fantasy romance, but it's not really a fantasy, then it must be mainly a romance. And the thing that everybody else loved about this book was the dialogue and the banter between the two main characters, and I hated it. I thought the dialogue was like so awful, so cringy. The male main character is just like, I hate everything that comes out of his mouth. He just like, oh god, he gives me the ick, like so bad. Like, this entire book just really gave me the ick. I don't think that it was well written. This was just something that I really feel like I missed what everybody else is seeing. Like, I feel like I read a different book than everybody else must be reading, because I don't get it. Like, I could see how I would have liked this book in middle school, but it feels like it is written for a very young audience. It is very like immature writing and dialogue, and I just didn't like it, obviously. Okay, then and I feel bad about this one because this was my book club pick for my book club. By the way, if you guys are in my book club, the book club will be coming back in February. Do not fear. We had to take a month or two hiatus, but we'll be back. Anyway, this is my first book club pick. I was bored. I didn't think it was good. It felt like a whole lot of nothing. The characters were very cardboard. I know a lot of people like to compare this book to Gilmore Girls, and they like to compare the couple to Luke and Lorelai, and I just think we're doing a disservice to Luke and Lorelai by saying that. Like, it's not similar in my opinion. It's like trying to be, but not successful. I really didn't like the female main character in this book. Just wasn't rooting for them. I don't know. Nothing about it I liked, really. I have heard that the subsequent books are better, and there was a character in this first book that I was like, oh, I'd kind of be interested in reading a book about him, and I think that one of the following books is about him, and that one's supposed to be better, so maybe I will give that one a try fall 2025. But as for now, Pumpkin Spice Cafe did not do it for me. Okay, and then lastly, we have Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey. This is, I don't think it's technically a novella. Maybe it is. It's pretty short. It's like 200 something something pages. This is a holiday romance. I just thought, again, like, did not like the characters. It was very odd. Like, the two main characters were just very, very odd. Like, I think I said this in the podcast, but the male main character is like almost scary. He is like the human embodiment of what you would imagine a purge mask to look like in real life. That's like how I pictured him. He just is like, I don't know. It was just very weird. This was also sort of like a workplace corporate romance, which is not my thing really. I wanted to give it a try. This is actually the first Tessa Bailey book that I have read, and overall I haven't heard like amazing things about her books. I still have It Happened One Summer on my TBR. Really need to read that book this year. Like, it has been on my shelf for like 3 years now, and I have heard that one is pretty good, but this one was not it for me. Yeah, those are the best and worst books that I read in 2024. Definitely let me know if you guys have read any of these books, what your thoughts were on them, or if you just want to share your favorite and least favorite books from 2024. I would also love to know what they are. Again, don't forget to listen to the first episode of Write That Down. I'm gonna have the links to the YouTube and the Spotify in the description. And yeah, that's gonna be all for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you very soon on here.